Okay, good morning. So, in the last class, we were looking at the whole process of the biochemical origin of life, and in that, we had seen there were three stages which were described. First one being the chemogeny, which we had already seen, which talks of chemical origin of life. Then the second one of biogeny, and third one of cognogeny. So in chemogeny, we had seen there was formation of simple organic compound, then complex organic compound, and then what is so called as coacervates, that is the molecular aggregates of this complex organic compound. And then that's from there, the whole of the like living matter would have started. So that was the quick revision of what we had looked in terms of chemogeny. Now, today we will be starting with the biogeny part. So that is like from molecules, like whatever complex coacervates we had seen, to the cells or formation of the first cell. That is what is called as biogeny. That is generation of life. So biogeny or life from non-living chemical compounds involve two main steps. What is known as origin of protocells. These protocells, they are also called as eobionts or protobionts. These are the from the coacervates to the first primitive living system. And this does not talk of the cell. This is just talking of the some molecular aggregates which were able to divide uh, or perform certain function, very basic functions in terms of energy generation or in terms of reproduction. That is what is primitive living system. And the second one is the from protocells to the first actual living cell, what we call as prokaryotes. So we'll see these processes. So in origin of ebionts or protobionts, inside the coacervates, we know now there were nucleotides might have combined with the certain molecules, like let's say protein, to form RNA molecule. And then it ultimately adapted itself over the millions of period of time to form into DNA, which was more stable. And this part we had already studied in the last chapter of the molecular inheritance, why the RNA is less stable and why DNA is more stable and so on. So this was the transition, and which on association with the proteins form nucleoprotein, that is this nuclear material, that is DNA, along with the histone protein, that called as nucleoprotein. And this is the assumption, that's how the process would have started. Nucleoproteins marked the beginning of the genetic material with the formation of nucleic acid and the surface membrane. Surface membrane was again part of that coacervate. We know that certain molecules, they were entrapped within a certain membrane of again biological molecule that would have formed a surface membrane and the inner genetic material. And the coacervates, they change into the first living system called as protocells or ebionts or protobionts. And it is obviously established that RNA was formed first because of its simplicity of the molecule compared to DNA and so on. So that is like the quick overview of this origin of ebionts or protobionts. And in the second stage, that is formation of early cells, or what we call them now as prokaryotes. The first cell probably arose from these protobionts, and they acted as an ancestor to the present day prokaryotes as well as eukaryotes. Again, this complexity, like I said, it has been increasing over the time. So from a very simplest living system to a simplest living cell, that transition would have taken again certain amount of time. And that first living cell acts as an ancestor to all of the species that are present on the earth, including prokaryote as well as eukaryote. So there are these two specific category again, if you remember from the five kingdom classification, monerans. These are the cells without well-defined nucleus, which are more close to this protobionts, or what we call as protocells. And then they evolved into prokaryote like bacteria and cyanobacteria. These bacteria, they were simplest living creatures. Cyanobacteria were the creatures who used to like survive on their own. or they used to like even extremophiles and so on. So that is what is the monerans. And then the second category, which ultimately developed again few millions of years later, was protista. These are the cells with distinct nucleus. That means these are eukaryotic cells, had a nuclear membrane around their genetic material. So whatever we had seen in terms of coacervates, just developing it over the time to form first living system, that is protocell, then forming a prokaryote-like cell, and then forming a eukaryote-like cell. So that is the process of biogeny in terms of these two steps, that is origin of protocells or protobands and the formation of first living cell. Any question here? Anyone? I hope this whole of this topic is relatively very simple in terms of understanding. So again, if you relate it with the chemogeny and biogeny, we have reached to the stage of formation of the first eukaryotic cell. Now, the next stage is the cognogeny, that is increasing the further complexity of this eukaryotic cells. So, this involves the evolution of mechanism of perception, expression, and communication. Perception as in understanding the surrounding, in in response to that surrounding, whatever expression is happening, and communication between the individuals of a species. So that is the mechanism, and that is involved in the cognogeny. So cognogeny involves diversification, that means differentiation into different species, and evolution of these prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So the early cells, they evolved into three methods of obtaining energy. And these are the three ones, like we already know, chemoheterotroph. These were the just simple chemical like living system dependent on the nutrition. So like that was the first mode of what we say the differentiation, not in terms of chemoheterotroph came first also, but these are just three different mechanisms in which the organism separated later in the form of chemoheterotrophs, chemoautotrophs. That means one which is dependent by the for the energy on the means of chemical energy, and second one was autotrophs. They used to synthesize their own chemical energy and use it up for the regular process, and photoautotrophs with the help of sunlight or solar energy, again synthesizing their own food. So these were the three distinct categories.
So,
Yeah.
what's the difference between chemoautotrophs and chemoheterotrophs? Like both of them take chemicals and form energy, right?
Yes, but then having the chemicals which are self-synthesized and having the chemicals like whatever we eat is more of a chemoheterotroph, right? So we take food from outside, which is of plants or animals, and then we use that chemical energy to break bonds and then the process of respiration and then getting energy. In chemoautotrophs, these are the chemicals which are synthesized within the body of an organism itself, and that energy is utilized to break down certain respiratory processes, and that energy is utilized for the what we call as life processes.
Also, but then they have to have some external source of energy, right, to propel the production of chemicals inside.
Chemical energy, you know. So they are absorbing chemicals like for example carbon dioxide. Even in the photoautotrophs, plants they take carbon dioxide, correct? So that way they are
But the energy comes from the sun, right?
correct.
So carbon dioxide is a raw material, but the energy they gain from the sun. So in chemoheterotrophs, the energy they gain from external chemicals. But the photoautotrophs, since they make the chemicals inside of them, they have to get some energy from outside to make the chemicals inside, right?
So obviously they will get, no, that is what I'm trying to say. In case of photoautotroph also, that is not completely independent system, right? They are still dependent on something which is external. though we call them autotroph. So similarly in chemoautotroph, it's just the chemical energy which is utilized for synthesis of their own energy. And in photoautotrophs, it's just solar energy that is utilized for the synthesis of molecule.
The no, like the chemoautotrophs, they gain, let's say they gain energy from the sun, and then they synthesize chemicals inside them and then use them. And photoautotrophs do the same, right?
No. So chemoautotrophs, they may or may not use solar energy at all.
Yes, they sir, but like chemoheterotrophs, they gain energy solely from chemicals, like external chemicals.
Huh.
And like the other two, they make energy like them, like chemoautotrophs and photoautotrophs. So both of them, they make their own chemicals inside.
Correct.
So like, at the end, everything is chemicals only.
Correct.
So they gain energy from outside.
In chemoautotroph, there is no sunlight. No?
So, like, why not? It can be any means, right? External energy. So, can we say that? So photoautotrophs, it's actually a part of chemoautotrophs.
Sorry, chemo. Say it again.
So then, photoautotrophs become a part of chemoautotroph. Because
yes, in a way, yes, because glucose is synthesized and that glucose is broken down for the energy production.
Yes,
that is right.
Okay. So chemoautotrophs can get energy from any source externally, but photoautotrophs only get it from sunlight.
Yeah, in a way, yes. Okay, so then what was the effect of all of these processes which were evolved on the photosynthesis, right? Impact of photosynthesis on these different mechanisms or evolutionary processes and so on. So cyanobacteria, they synthesize their food from carbon dioxide. Cyanobacteria, that is that blue-green algae, right? So they had chlorophyll-like pigment, not exactly chlorophyll, but chlorophyll-like pigment, which had the ability to entrap the solar energy and form it into chemical energy, and then it will form certain organic compounds and then release the oxygen, which is something similar to photosynthesis process. That was the earlier process. And the aerobic forms, that means whatever aerobic organisms were there, they started using free oxygen. So as this process started with the photosynthesis or a kind of photosynthesis, it started liberating free oxygen. Again, if you think in terms of reducing environment to shifting into oxidizing environment, earlier there was no free oxygen. Over the time, as and when the photosynthesis started happening, the free oxygen level went on increasing. So that is what is being pointed here. So the aerobic forms started using free oxygen in the oxidation of the organic compound. And this resulted in the evolution of the respiratory mechanism. Again, when the oxidation of the organic compound happened, that again released the carbon dioxide. If you remember that whole of the cycle of photosynthesis to glycolysis to Krebs cycle and so on. So photosynthesis will release oxygen. Respiration at the end of Krebs cycle will release the carbon dioxide again. So both of these products were released into the atmosphere. So that was the effect of photosynthesis on this evolutionary process. And what at the end happened, like just from the cyanobacteria to eukaryotic cell to the complex eukaryotic organism, it resulted in the evolution of the respiratory mechanism. Again, that itself is a very like a huge topic to talk about, but I hope you understand the crux of this slide. So all of this process where the oxygen was liberating, that means the free oxygen level was increasing in the atmosphere. So to adapt to that situation, certain organisms, they developed a respiratory system or respiratory mechanisms. And the CO2 evolved during the respiration was again utilized in the photosynthesis. And that again become another complex system, what we know them as plants now. So they will take lot of carbon dioxide, they will increase the oxygen level. So that was the whole cycle, and that was the impact of photosynthesis process on this evolution process. Then and what happened in this whole of this impact of photosynthesis, it made sure that there is regular inflow of energy in the biosphere. So photosynthesis again is one way of entrapping energy, and that will release glucose, and then that will release oxygen. That oxygen is again utilized by other organisms. So this was the whole mechanism. That means a regular inflow of energy in the form of whole of the biosphere system that was maintained. It changed the atmosphere from reducing to oxidizing, obviously, because free oxygen level started increasing. So earlier it was reducing, it started shifting towards more of the oxidizing atmosphere. Evolved method of utilizing carbon dioxide and converting it into sugar. And that's what I said, like when the photosynthesis was completely evolved, what we know currently in the plant system, that is one of the mechanism which utilizes carbon dioxide and convert it into sugar like glucose. So that mechanism was also developed, and that was the whole impact of the photosynthesis process from the cyanobacteria, which was a very simpler mechanism of something similar to photosynthesis, which went on evolved later. Then the impact of oxygen on evolution, what is also called as oxygen reduction. Now this does not literally mean a reduction in the level, but we will see that what exactly it means. So the impact of oxygen evolution involves formation of oxidizing atmosphere. We already know this. Due to photosynthesis, oxygen started accumulating in the atmosphere, and the reducing atmosphere started changing into the oxidizing atmosphere. So obviously more oxygen, more aerobic type of organisms they were formed, because whole of this situation was more of the adaptation to the environment. Reducing atmosphere did not allow much of the organisms to grow. So as and when they started shifting towards the oxidizing, different kinds of organisms they started forming, including this aerobic organism, which were capable of utilizing oxygen for energy. And then, like for example, human. Of course, human came in much later, but then there are lower vertebrate organism which became more apparent. Free oxygen reacted with methane and ammonia, which was again a part of the reducing environment, and then oxidized them to CO2 and nitrogen, that is the free nitrogen respectively. And that is what is referred to as this oxidizing atmosphere. So everything which was in the reducing atmosphere started changing slowly. First thing was free oxygen generation due to the process of photosynthesis, and in the second stage, methane and ammonia, which were present in the reducing environment, they started converting or getting oxidized to the carbon dioxide and nitrogen molecule. And one of the impact of this oxygen on evolution, again, if you think in terms of earlier days, or during that primitive earth situation, the temperature was too high, and one of the aspect of this was related to the UV radiation that was coming on the earth. Now, because of the formation of the ozone layer, this UV radiation was protected. And how did it happen? It was the ozonosphere which was developed by the reaction of oxygen under the influence of UV radiation. So it's like a whole cycle again. Earlier there was no oxygen, and that's when a lot of UV radiation used to come. Moment the oxygen started forming, it also started evolving into the ozone layer, and that ozone layer itself blocked the UV radiation. So that is again the whole process in the formation of ozone layer, and that is the second impact that oxygen has on the process of evolution. Then the third impact that was present in the oxygen of the oxygen on this whole evolution process is the oxygen revolution and the formation of present day atmosphere. Again, simplistically, the oxygen level went on increasing. So the evolution of this oxidizing atmosphere put an end to the abiotic synthesis. Abiotic synthesis as in whatever it started with, that formation of like in terms of Miller and Urey's experiment, that methane, ammonia, and all those gases, they forming a certain smaller molecule, right? In terms of smaller amino acid or nucleotide fragments and so on. So that process of abiogenesis that stopped, and due to the consumption of products which were formed by this abiotic process, that led to completely shift into the environmental situation. So that is like it started with abiotic or abiogenesis. It went on to biogenesis. So the abiogenesis, which was happening earlier, obviously it needed UV radiation. UV radiation stopped coming. The temperature cooled down. Free oxygen wasn't there. It started developing more and more concentration of free oxygen. So all of these situation, they became more and more favorable for the biogenesis process. That is life from life. So, and then abiotic system that was almost stopped. And what happened due to the impact of free oxygen? It led to the evolution of aerobic mode of respiration. What we experience these days, or we undergo, that is the aerobic mode of respiration, which yielded more energy compared to the anaerobic. Anaerobic in general is not so efficient process, and that is what evolved to a more efficient, that is the aerobic mode of respiration. If you remember, like we had seen this respiration process, aerobic and anaerobic respiration. If the glycolysis undergoes the aerobic respiration, that is complete breakdown of glucose molecule up to carbon dioxide, it leads 36 or 38 molecules of ATP. I don't remember exactly, but something like that. And from glucose via anaerobic pathway, it leads to hardly 2 molecules of ATP because it undergoes that fermentation process, that was lactic acid or alcohol formation. So that is anaerobic mode of respiration. So obviously aerobic way of respiration was more and more efficient in terms of energy, and that is why it got evolved after the anaerobic process. So that is the whole lot of impact of oxygen on evolution. So within the cognoscenti, we saw the impact of photosynthesis, like how situation changed due to the photosynthesis, which led to the formation of oxygen. Then we looked at what was the impact of oxygen on this further evolution. So there were different changes. And then now the final thing, that will be the evolution of eukaryotes. So now complex system they have started developing. This aerobic mode of respiration is itself in itself a complex process. So that was more of the higher eukaryotic species. So then eukaryotes, they are believed to have evolved from the prokaryotes and the archaebacteria either by their symbiotic association or invagination. Symbiotic association as in, like as and when these prokaryotes they were developing into eukaryotic organism, they started living with each other, that is symbiosis. And like the eukaryote and prokaryote, I mean, that's what assumed, it is believed to have evolved. So, and the invagination is one of the species living inside the other species, like kind of parasitic, right? So that is the invagination, and that is what developed into the complex process. So in symbiotic origin of eukaryotes, these cells are presumed to have evolved when the aerobic bacteria started living inside some primitive prokaryotes symbiotically. Now these prokaryotes, they were able to uh, gain their energy. So these aerobic bacteria, they started living inside these primitive prokaryotes, and that too symbiotical. That means both were getting benefited. And the second way of evolution could have been the origin by invagination, that is mitochondria and chloroplast-like structures that were developed by the surface membrane of these primitive prokaryotes. So it's like if you just take the mitochondria or chloroplast as a structure, they have their own mechanism of energy generation, right? Like even in terms of they have their own DNA, they have their own like energy generation process. So that gives some hint that it could be more close to prokaryote system in itself, what is present in the eukaryotic cell. And that is what is referred to as the invagination process. And that is how the eukaryotes, they have evolved. And again, after this, then you know the process, like starting from the fish or rather invertebrates to vertebrates and then higher vertebrates and so on. So that is the whole lot of evolution process, which we'll see later how the changes in the physical abilities or physical structures has also happened. Any question so far in this cognogen? Okay, so then we will move on to the next topic, that is the evolution of the life forms. So according to this theory of organic evolution or bioevolution, all of this, all the living forms, they have evolved from some single common ancestor. That is the first organism, right? Whichever we talk of after the protocell, that is the single common ancestor for all the organisms that exist as of now on the earth. And that is what is called as monophyletic origin. Monophyletic means mono is single, phyletic is again that phylum of the or the category of the organism. So that is monophyletic origin. I don't know anything which exists as a polyphyletic organism, because it's only one. So that is monophyletic origin. That means having a single common ancestor of all the living species on the earth. So through the gradual modification over the time, process of adaptation, process of natural selection, over 1.5 million different species they evolved, right? And this we know already, like the number of species that we have is quite a lot on the earth. All of them, they evolved from a common ancestor, and how it's obviously adapting to their situation. Slow changes, that is gradual modification, and the natural selection, whichever was like fitter in terms of adapting to the environment, that was survival. So that is the process which led to the evolution, or what is also called as organic evolution. And this is what is described as descent with modification. So if you remember, we had seen this statement earlier in context with Darwin. Darwin has described this as descent with modification. Descent means going down. Now this is along the path of evolution. We are going down. Down does not mean like in literal sense down. It is just evolving from one direction to the other. That's what descent means in this context. And that is happening with respect to the modification. So the features of this doctrine of evolution, or what is known as the descent with modification, these are the obvious things. Unicellular organisms, they were first to appear. Multicellular organisms evolved from the unicellular ones, and the early forms, they were simple in structure, which evolved gradually into more and more complex ones. So that is the doctrine of evolution. That means we say, like we have an Indian constitution. It lays down certain rules and regulations and laws and stuff like that. So in the process of evolution, this is universally believed facts. Unicellular came first, then multicellular came, and then it became more complex organism. So that is the doctrine of evolution, or the descent with modification features. Now, what are those evidences? Like we spoke of different this biogeny, chemogeny, cognogeny, and so on. But what are those evidences that speak of that it happened in that particular manner only? Or what were those different proof points that led to the conclusion that this was the right path, that what scientists or researchers have thought of? So the doctrine of biological evolution, that is those 3 points that we had seen, is supported by the evidence from the study of different branches of biology. Includes paleontology, comparative anatomy, morphology, embryology, geographical distribution, taxonomy, molecular biology, cytology, and genetics. All of these things, they have contributed to the whole process of biological evolution. For example, paleontology, which we'll see, the study of fossils, right? So that led us to certain conclusions with respect to the structure, with respect to certain DNA samples, if at all they were available, or the carbon dating processes. We will see one by one all of these processes in sequence, like how exactly the identification techniques are used in these different streams of biology. Comparative anatomy and morphology, we know like certain organism looks like this, so it has so and so body parts, so that is like comparative anatomy and morphology. Embryology, again a specific examples of embryology we'll see in terms of how the embryo development happens across the species and what is the similarity and what are the differences. And geographical distribution, which kind of terrain or which kind of territory on this land the particular species is found and so on. Like for example, polar bear or the like deer, lion and so on. So they are like kind of territorial organisms. Within that region only they are found, and that is what is geographical distribution talks about. Why did they why are they only found in that region? Because they have adapted more to that situation. Taxonomy, what are the different classes or subclasses, that whole of the hierarchy. Molecular biology, what is the molecular aspects in terms of the interaction of proteins or interaction of molecules within the cell and so on. Cytology, how is the cell structure, arrangement and so on, differentiation process, characteristics. And then genetics, of course we know this one. So if we have to talk about the evidences from paleontology or paleobiology, what is also called as, is the study of fossils of animals and plants that lived in past. That is the definition of paleontology. So the fossils, these are actual remains or traces or impressions left by the organisms, which might have been preserved in rocks, or which might have been preserved just in the soil, which have become very hard and so on. So that's what is included in this paleontology. And there are two specific branches, which is the plant fossil. Study of plant fossil is called as paleobotany, and the study of animal fossil is called as paleozoology. So there was this, you might have heard this name, Leonardo da Vinci of Italy. He is called as father of paleontology because he had studied quite a lot in that aspect. Like, and there was this other guy called as Cuvier. He was the founder of modern paleontology. So these are the two names. I don't know if it is included in that list of scientists that you need to know, but yeah, this is for your information. So now looking at, so we will just look at this formation of fossils and then we will stop here for today. So in terms of formation of fossil, I would assume just by general knowledge or by reading or by learning it earlier, you would know what fossils are, right? So this formation of fossils happens based on the environmental condition. So they may include the original remains of the hard parts of the organism, including like bone, teeth or shell, in the sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock, that means these rocks, they have been formed by the process of sedimentation, or like after original remains, or this can be petrifaction of the hard and soft parts. Petrifaction is kind of decaying process. Like if a certain organic matter, if it is staying in the natural environment, the bacteria, fungus or any of these species, they can decay or they can cause the decay of these hard and soft parts of the organism, and these can also act as the fossils. Carbonized film, rest everything is gone, only the carbon is left, and that is what is carbonized film. And but again, these processes, they take over like quite long number of years. Molds, which are the impressions within the organism, impressions of the organism in the rocks, or casts, which are the molds filled with foreign material, or as an actual remain in the peat, amber and asphalt, right? Or even ice for that matter. So these are the peat is nothing but just the like a layer of soil which is harder. So the upper surface of the soil that we know at a particular region, if it is harder, and whatever was whatever organisms they were present at that time when the hardening started taking place, that acts as a pit. Amber is hardened resin. Most of the plant products they used to have this hardened resin, but again that can also form naturally in various processes from different biomolecules. So that is what is amber, and within this amber, if certain organisms, bone or leaf or stem or whatsoever, any part of the living organism from the earlier era is there. Same is the hardened tar, which is called as asphalt. Or ice, of course. You know that ice has a property of preserving something for many like years or even hundreds of years, like, and that is when, like, if we do the excavation in the polar sites on the earth, there are quite many evidences that can be found below these ice layers, because they will be preserved as it. So the land animals may get fossilized in amber, asphalt, volcanic ash, or pit box and sand deposits, or in ice, in any of these different forms. Altered remains of the fossils. These are especially in the ice. So altered remains, unaltered. Unaltered means without any change. These organisms, they have been protected as it is. Like, let's say a particular bird or an animal has died, and due to the temperature, lowest temperature, the metabolic activity completely stops, and due to that there is no degradation or decaying of that organism within the ice layers, and that is what is also called as nature's cold storage or nature's cold warehouse, it is called as. That's where the unaltered remains of the fossils can be found. Then there is something called as altered fossils, which I already spoke. They are also called as petrified fossils, which are decaying fossils. That means they are degraded over the time due to the organic matter decomposition, which is quite obvious. Like, let's say even a human dies, and the body is just left out in the open, let's say in a jungle or so, that body starts decaying, because there is lot of microorganisms and even the other parasitic species, they start growing inside this dead body, and that becomes later completely altered fossil, because that was not the original structure of that particular organism. So that's why it is called altered or petrified. Molds and casts. So when like different bodies, they disintegrate, leaving the hollow cavities, these are called as molds. And again, like in something like mummies, right, what you know of from the movies and stuff, these, their bodies, they disintegrate at times, leaving a hollow cavity. So most of the times from the external surface it will look like the body is intact, but inside they would have found hollow cavity. And again, this is not always that cavity inside means the skin will stay intact and only the inner part is hollow. Nothing like that. It's just the cavity that is formed due to the external structure. Let's say a particular dead body was buried inside the soil layer or rock layer. Then the internal decomposition might have started, and the whole of that organism stay as it is in terms of the shape. That is what is mold. And the molds, they can retain their shape, and then over the time they can get filled with the natural deposits of minerals, which again harden to become exact casts. So that means if, let's say, calcium like material gets deposited, it over the time becomes very hard, and they end up having the shape of these molds, and that is what is called as casts. So there is this very interesting excavation that was found. So in the Pompeii city, this is one of the city in Italy. It's very ancient city that way, where they had a volcanic eruption in 79 AD. That's like in the first century. Due to this volcanic eruption, many of the people, including everything, plants, animals, and human beings, everything was deep buried inside that volcanic lava. And because of that, like they have obviously turned into the fossil now after 2000 years. And that is what is one of the example of these molds and casts. And the prints or impressions. Now prints or impression is something like again on the soil surface or even on the rock surface when it is just simply forming. If there are some prints or footprints of the organism, or the and a particular organism is sitting or the tree has fallen down and that impression has been made on the soil, and if it stays intact over the time, right? Like it doesn't happen so easily with the smaller animals, but if the organisms are bigger, that is very very apparent. For example, that dinosaur structure which was found somewhere in African terrain, that has a quite good impression on the rocks of the species, especially that flying dinosaur. I forgot the name, but yeah, something like that. So that can form the prints or impressions. Then tracks and trails. Obviously, the movement of these organisms over the time, they might have kept some tracks, and again, due to the hardening of the surfaces, these tracks or trails, they remain as it is, and they become, it's a simple thing like even in the rainy season, if it is all muddy and if we walk, we tend to create the impressions of the footprint, right? And if next day or onwards it's like completely dried, then those footprints, they tend to remain for even months. So that is like a simplest tracks and trails. And again, at earlier times, because there was less intervention of the other species, these tracks and trails, they can be used as one of the evidence in the evolution process. Then there is this very specific terminology called as coprolites, which is the fossils of the fecal matter or the droppings of the animals, right? If again, this has to change over the time, change in the sense they have to become harder, and it has to stay intact as it is. uh, Organic decomposition may or may not have happened in these coprolites, but then they still act as one of the major source of like fossil evidence. Also, this fecal matter or dropping, that also gives an idea about what kind of animal it would have in terms of what kind of diet or what kind of nutrition was followed by them, and so on. So there are various parameters that can be studied. And the compressed fossils, which is like just a thin carbon film, due to the changes over the time, the layers, they get impacted, and that simply becomes like a thin carbon film that can still act as a compressed fossil. So these were the different evidences in the formation of fossils for the testing of the biological evolution. How do we identify that particular organism existed earlier or now it doesn't exist anymore, or what would have been the situation there? Yes.
Is there a way of measuring the age of a bone or something other than carbon dating?
Sorry, come again.
So is there a method of like you have a bone of a dinosaur, and if you want to measure it, so is there a way except carbon dating in which you can have the age?
To calculate the age?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there is method. So actually we will see immediately after this, we have this method of carbon dating, or even radioactive compound dating. So there is quite a lot. So determination of age of fossils and dating of fossil, that is exactly the next topic. So we'll see that, and also putting them into the geological time scale and so on. So that we'll see in the next class.
So in radioactive material dating, those will be in rocks, right? Not in bones.
No,
Those will be in rocks, right? Like, so like the other elements, like except carbon 14, those will be in rocks, right?
Correct.
Like I'm talking about bones, like dinosaur bones.
No, yes, that is true. So you can simply imagine now this situation. Let's say, like we can take this volcanic eruption example, right? So do we want to know how long that species has existed? That we may or may not be so clear in terms of number, like how long, since how long that species is existed. But to identify like when this particular event or when this particular fossil has found, yes, that then there are these two different processes, that radioactive dating and the carbon dating. That's what was the question, right?
Uh, yes, sir. So like is like for a bone or something, for a tissue, is there a way other than carbon dating that we can find, like used to find out the age of the tissue?
So actually, it depends on the tissue. See, if it is only carbon left, that because most of the other matters they get decayed or petrified.
So bones will be left. So there might be other materials in bones also.
I'm not sure of it. I don't know, I must say. I don't know. But I'm sure there will be something.
So cause like I heard that carbon dating is not very reliable over long ages.
Uh, in terms of its exactness, yes, that is the case. But in terms of approximate age, like if you have to pinpoint millions of years ago and which specific year, yes, it may not be able to do it. But if you want to say, let's say 1.25 millions of years ago, that is approximately correct.
So, but like I heard that after a few half-lives, it becomes extremely difficult to even measure the amount of C14 that's there, right?
Yes.
So like you get a very big inaccuracy, like very big.
Yes,
Like
that
it might span over, like if it's very old, it might span over hundreds of millions of years.
yeah.
So like then you can't really say with carbon dating, right?
Yes, so that's when like mostly it's not the matter of the fossil that is being tested. It's also tested with the surrounding parts, like whether it's a rock or soil or whatsoever. It is always tested with that, and that is being put into that geological time scale, and then check whether it's matching.
Oh yes, so like even that I was wondering. So there's a rock and the bone is found inside the rock.
Hmm.
So and the rock shows us a particular age because of some radioactive. If the radioactive material is present in the rock, then we have a particular age of that rock. So, but we can't say that that's the same age as the bone, right? Because
Correct.
like let's just say the rock is 300 million years old. Like we find it's 300 million years. Then like from that time till now, it survived that rock.
Right.
So before the dinosaurs, also it could have been 200 million years old, right?
That is true. That is true. So that is why.
So like we can't really say anything except that if the rock is 300 million years old, we can only say that this dinosaur lived after 300 million years old.
Yeah, that's totally correct.
But if the rock is like 2 billion years old, then we can't really say anything, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's totally true.
So like but like uh, this this specify, right, like this dinosaur was found like 200 point like 220 million years ago, this one was found this. So how do they know exactly when which dinosaur was found?
No, sorry, what did you ask?
So like we can see that it's difficult to figure out, right?
Hmm.
But when the archaeologists, like in videos and all, when they say something,
Hmm.
they have like pretty accurate figures, like only spanning of like a little gap. Like
So
how do they get those figures?
it totally depends on the sample, how good the sample is, right? And also, in general, like nowadays we have developed quite a few technological advances. So most of these things they are done with the simulations in the sense of like you feed a computer with certain parameters, like so and so is the environmental condition, so and so is the earth condition, and now you give us the output, and then you based on certain output, like a particular situation would have occurred. Let's say, for example, volcanic eruption. Then what would happen to the sample? And then if it matches with the observation that we are getting from the sample, then that's what is being published later. That okay, this is the possibility that what could have happened back then, and that is the age and so on.
So, like, if like volcanic rocks were found in a sample, so you could say that this, and there was a fossil inside, then you could say that this guy, like this dinosaur, died because of this volcanic eruption or lived at that era. But so there were like so many volcanic eruptions, right?
Yeah.
And how do we know which happened where? So see, like we need a reference point, right? So let's just say 300 million years ago there was a lot of greenery. So we need fossils of that to prove that there were greenery. And right, we need some particular type of fossils, right, to prove that these were the kinds of plants, green plants that existed 300 million years ago. And
Right.
like if our like we discussed with carbon dating and the rocks, if our method of finding out that like is not reliable, like it gives a big span, then we can't even say that it was green 300 million years ago. So if we find a dinosaur that lived in green areas, we can't say that it might have lived 3 million years ago when it was green, because the first point itself we can't prove accurately, right, that it was green 300 million years ago.
Yes, that's totally true. And that's when we actually study with all these different aspects. So it's not just fossil or it's not just geographical point, but rather we try to gather as many proof point as possible to conclude something. And,
So
and
there might be a like more accurate method to calculate the age of something, right? So like for scientists to know such accurate figures.
I'm not sure. I will have to read about it. I'm totally not aware of these things. Yeah. Okay, I guess let's stop here. Tomorrow we will talk about these topics more and more, and there we can have these questions again. Yeah, and maybe like I will think about this question of yours. Is there any advanced method or so? So there we can try to answer it. Okay.